I can tell you when we were at the COF meeting, where it was first delivered to us by the Canadian Affairs Minister, I think is what he calls himself, from Quebec. They printed it off and everybody took a copy home. And we also had a statement in our communique that talked about how we believe that the federal government should be working with us rather than going directly to municipalities. So I wouldn't be surprised if others follow Quebec leads.
As a follow, is the province prepared to replace the funds that you're hoping that municipalities and other parties are not going to take if this legislation goes through?
Well, what I would hope will happen is that the federal government will work with us on our priorities for housing, for infrastructure, and for transportation projects like they do with Quebec. In Quebec, they announced $900 million to the Housing Accelerator Fund. In British Columbia, they announced $2 billion for their BC Builds Fund. But in Alberta, they've swooped in and they've got a special deal with Edmonton, a special deal with Calgary. They've handpicked 6 different municipalities to work directly with and left over 340 other municipalities out in the cold. We just don't think that's fair, pitting one region against another, big city against small city, rural against urban. And so we're going to be insisting that they work with us. So we'll see. I mean, they know how to do this. They worked collaboratively with us to identify a 10-year funding arrangement for healthcare. They worked with us to identify 4 program areas where we could jointly work on together. For some reason, and I think it's politics, they're choosing not to work with us on certain issues, and it's not right. So I believe that the federal government should do the right thing, make sure we get our equal per capita share, and we'll see what happens if they don't.
It's my turn. Thank you. Hi. You've mentioned Quebec, and when you were here a few months ago to announce your representative of Alberta in Ottawa, you also talked about the Quebec way of doing things. I'm wondering, have there been any evolutions in your talks with Quebec of any like cooperation or collaboration on certain issues? To Ian's question, I know that you're talking about it with all premiers, but have you sort of talked a bit more about it with Quebec?
The forum that we use to get together is the Council of the Federation. Mm-hmm. And so we have another meeting coming up in Western Premiers happening in June in Whitehorse and then in July in Halifax. So that would probably be the next time that I have a chance to either speak with Premier Legault or one of his designates. But no, we don't have regular communication. No.
And on COF, I think there was a call last week or around
today
when the housing, again today, okay. But there was one also, I think last week when Prime Minister was doing all these housing announcements in provincial jurisdictions. I think
we're having our COF meeting today to talk about that.
Do you expect, because you said at the end of your conversation up on the stage that you were hoping that others would also be more vocal like Alberta or Quebec. Do you expect a sort of united front measure or strategy between COF?
The provinces are the strongest when we have a united front. And I don't mean to keep going back to the health accord, but that to me is an example of how cooperative federalism should work. It's our area of jurisdiction, healthcare. When we initially started off the program, it was supposed to be cost shared, 50-50. The federal government has not lived up to that commitment. We worked for years to try to get them to get back to that 50-50 funding arrangement. In the absence of that, they had an envelope package, and all of the premiers said that we want to be able to get the same per capita funding. And if any province gets a sweetener, that every province would have it written into their clause that we get the same thing. And as I understand it, all of the provinces got the same per capita funding. We have slightly different ways in which we'll be implementing that. But that's what cooperative federalism should look like. And that's the demonstration of what happens when the provinces stand together.
Something else because there's all these announcements on housing. Because
I hope
there's
so.
all these.
I hope so. The thing is, Quebec and BC have already got theirs. And so the federal government is playing divide and conquer with it, unfortunately. But we'll have a conversation on what the strategy should be. But I can't imagine any of my provincial counterparts saying, we got ours, so too bad for you. That's just not the relationship that we have at the table. The relationship we have at the table is we recognize that everyone should get their equal per capita share, that our northern territories probably need more than equal per capita just because of the extra costs associated with doing business up north and the small populations. But I would say that I would expect that the premiers will be united on this.
And we'll go to a pink blazer in the front, pink blazer in the back, and then back to the front here.
Kate McKenna, CBC. Premier, according to Royal LePage, the cost of a home in Calgary has increased nearly 10% in the last year. It's set to go up again according to Royal LePage. I'm wondering what you're going to do to increase the number of builds in that area.
Well, I can tell you, we certainly do not want to have the housing crisis that we see in Toronto and Vancouver, where attainable housing is just out of reach of most young people. We're hearing stories, for instance, of people who are buying houses in Edmonton and then commuting to Vancouver on the plane and then coming back to Alberta because of how expensive it is in British Columbia. And that would be, we certainly are not going to allow for that situation. I believe if you look at our housing prices in both Edmonton and Calgary, we're at the lower end of how much it costs for median income that you need to be able to buy a house, and we want to keep it that way. But we have worked with the municipalities and with our building association to identify some of the problems. The biggest problems that we have right now, quite frankly, are regulations and permits, the length of time it takes to develop an area structure plan, issue a development permit, issue a building permit. And we have some shiny examples of municipalities who brag about being able to get a development permit in a few days or building permits within a few weeks. That's what we're asking. We have more to come because we know that if we can partner on being able to take the burden off so that we are able to get more houses built by the private sector. That's our preference. We're looking at ways that we can accelerate transportation projects, because if you can build out a road that opens up a 10,000 person community, that's another thing that we would be able to do. And then when it comes to affordable housing, and we make the distinction, attainable housing is that kind of first home that you buy as a young person, so that you can start building wealth. Affordable housing is for our most vulnerable, and we know that we're going to have to build that too. So we have a plan to build $840 million worth of affordable housing over the next 3 years. We think that'll be 25,000 units. So it's a hybrid approach.
On a slightly different topic, I'm wondering what premiers are getting from the federal Conservatives when they write and publish letters about the carbon tax.
What do you mean by support?
Is there any orchestration on the federal level?
No. There's, we all share the concern about the impact that we're seeing in our jurisdictions. I read the news just like anybody else, so I can see what the federal leader is doing. But I can tell you our concern comes down largely to the fact that our province is operating 90% or more than that. Almost 100% of our heating in our province is through natural gas. And now with the carbon tax on natural gas, it's $4.09 per gigajoule, whereas the cost of gas is $1.80 per gigajoule. Like it's insane that we have a tax that is more than 2 times the price of the base cost of the fuel for people to heat their homes. We're a cold province. And so those are we have a slightly unique approach in Alberta, because I realize that's not necessarily the case in every jurisdiction. So we chart our own path in opposing the federal carbon tax for different reasons.
Mr. Poilievre, under his proposed housing plan, says that federal funding will be tied to housing starts, and that if municipalities build more homes, they're going to get a building bonus. Any problems with that approach? What do you make of that?
I would say that as long as he's working through the provincial government, we're not going to have any problem with that. Because I have to tell you, it is totally inefficient for a federal government to come in and think that they can make individual bilateral arrangements with 355 different municipalities. That is the very definition of red tape. Our provincial government has established relationships with all of those municipalities. And so it just makes sense that they would work through us so that we can assure that the dollars get through to the municipalities who need it. So I would say that the policy that we have applies to no matter who is in the Prime Minister's chair. We expect that they're going to respect provincial jurisdiction and work with us.
And that's just what I want to clarify, that would you take this priorities bill approach under a Conservative government?
Well, Quebec has taken it under no matter who happens to be Prime Minister. And I can tell you the frustrations that the premiers have. It hasn't, even in those provinces where they have a Liberal or NDP premier, they don't find that it's any less of a frustration that the federal government interferes in their affairs. So I believe that this is just the way cooperative federalism should work, regardless of who's in the chair.